All right, welcome back. So in the last couple of videos, we've really been getting a deeper understanding for the Jewish people and our role for the Jewish people, how the church provokes them to jealousy, how the Lord still has a plan for ethnic Jewish people. Not that being born of Abraham matters, but what matters, Paul told us, is being a child of the promise. And there is a promise concerning ethnic Israel that will be fulfilled in the last days. We also learned from that passage we're going to look at a lot more in a different series when we get to our Daniel series on this prophecy that Daniel saw about the 70 weeks and how there is one final week of years, 7 years remaining, that God will turn his attention back to the Jewish people after the fullness of the Gentiles has taken place. And in that period, the, the covenantal promises that the Lord has made to these people will be fulfilled. And so to really understand that, we need to go back and understand what exactly was promised. We also learned that it matters. Like, these are actually important things that aren't just historical oddities or theological truths. They matter because the Jewish people in the land of Israel are so prominent in the understanding of God's grace. They're so prominent in understanding the promises and the election and the callings of the Lord that the Lord can use how we treat Jewish people in the Jewish land as a way of bringing in judgment. And so we can't afford to be in error about this issue. And so let's study it more. And you're going to see in this in these passages, the end times context starts to become more and more clear rather rapidly. In the next video, we're gonna see some really interesting things. But to get all this, we got to understand some of this meat of the word. And I'm going to make this as simple as possible. And these are subject matters you could delve into on a much more lengthy basis. But we're going to have to chew on it a little bit. The meat of the word always requires some chewing. So don't be discouraged if you don't get it right away. As anything with the end times, you can't just watch one video series or read one book and expect to have it all down. This is a subject matter that you have to dig into a whole bunch. And even then you start to forget things, and the Lord's bringing in new insight and revelation all the time. So stick with it is my encouragement to you. But we're going to start by looking at when God called Abraham out of his homeland and gave him the promise that he was going to make a new nation from him. And this would be the nation that, when we looked at that Genesis 3:15 verse where God said there's going to be a man that comes to crush the head of Satan. Well, where's this man going to come from? Well, we learn here that he is going to come from this new nation that God is starting from, an old man with an old barren wife. So even the possibility of them having a child, much less a family, much less a nation, is already an impossibility when he picks them. And that's what the Lord loves to do. He loves to pick the impossible so that he gets all the glory. So in Genesis 12, he says to Abraham, or Abram at the time, now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country to a specific land. And so you're going to see land be a big part of all these verses that we're going to be going through. Go to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Now listen to this. I will bless those who bless you, and whom dishonors you, I will curse. And so he has promised Abraham, I'm going to give you a land, and I'm going to give you a people, and that land and that people combined to make a nation. And again, just like that, Matthew 25, where how we treat the Jewish people matters, we see that here too. If someone's good to you and good to your people, they will be blessed. If someone curses you, they will be cursed. And so how we treat them matters here in Genesis. It matters in Matthew 25 as well. At the beginning of this time period and at the end of the age, it's an important matter. And the Jewish people, we can tell, are going to be a contentious people from this right here. People are going to want to bless you. Other people are going to want to curse you. You are really set up to be the dividing line amongst people. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So even right away, when he's first talking to Abraham, we realize that there's going to be a blessing poured on you. This nation is important. The land is important. But the blessing and the promise don't get limited to these borders. That's the jumping off point into the whole world being blessed. And he covers that promise multiple times. And so starting here in Genesis 12 and really going for the next almost like 10 chapters, there's just this dealing with Abraham and the reiteration of these promises in many different forms. But if you kind of peel it away, the core of it is, I'm going to make a nation of you, a new people, the Jewish people, and I'm going to give you a specific land. And we're going to see that these promises for you to be in this land are everlasting promises. And we see that the word forever will be used quite a bit as well. So we go to the next chapter. Here he's already moved down to the land. His nephew Lot is with him. And this is the point where Lot and Abraham decide, hey, their families have gotten too big and they need to actually sort of part ways, so that their workmen were always kind of getting into conflicts. And so, hey, let's separate. And after they separate, the Lord takes Abraham up to a hill and says, now, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. So he keeps making this promise over and over again to Abraham because it's just that important. God wasn't going to keep this limited to one little teeny section of scripture. He was going to reiterate a promise over and over and over again. Whenever the Lord repeats himself, that should be a cue to us to really pay attention, because this is something that's very prominent on the heart of the Lord. Now, we're going to skip a couple chapters again and just look at how he reiterates these promises again in Genesis 15. This is probably one of the more famous passages where he takes Abraham outside of his tent and says, look up at the night sky, look at all the stars. If you could count all those stars, that's the way it is going to be with your offspring. They're going to be so numerous you can't count them. And Abraham, who still hasn't had a child at this point, he's not getting any younger, and his wife is still barren, and she's not getting any younger. Yet even still, it says in verse 6, he believed the Lord. He believed that impossible to believe promise. And what was the result? It said that the Lord reckoned that belief, that faith, as righteousness. It's an important sort of gospel verse, Genesis 15, verse 6, where we learn that faith is credited to us as righteousness. You don't have a righteousness within yourself. You can't work to get that righteousness, but righteousness can be credited to you. It can be an outside righteousness, not your own, can be given to you through faith. That's the heart of what we believe the gospel of grace has at it, is that it's that grace that comes to you by faith and not by works. And then he again reiterates that land promise. I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur to give you this land to possess it. But then Abraham says, oh Lord, how may I know that I will possess it? And what the Lord does here is really interesting. He enters into a ceremony that was more common in this time, but it involved taking several different types of animals, cutting them in half, and taking one half of the animal and setting it on one part of a pathway, and then the other half on the other side, and they killed another animal, and they did the same thing. And so you had this bloody trail of sort of dismembered animals. It's a gruesome picture. But back then, it was a way of making a very serious oath, a covenant with somebody else. And what the people were doing when they were making an agreement like that, they would cut the animals in half. They would walk between them as they made their promises to each other. And in so doing, the object lesson was, if I don't fulfill my end of the bargain of what I'm promising you today, I should end up like these animals that we're walking through. I should be killed like they have been killed. So it was a very serious promise to make. And so they do that. They cut the animals in half. They set out this trail. And typically Abraham and the Lord, since they're making this covenant together, would walk down the path together. But this is the interesting part. God causes Abraham to fall asleep so he can't walk the path. And he makes these promises of the land and the nation to him while Abraham is in a deep sleep, almost as if to say, this has nothing to do, these are the promises I'm making, and I'm making them by myself. And then instead of the Lord walking down the path with Abraham, it says there's this boiling fire pot, and then this torch that comes, this lit torch, and these two sort of symbols of fire go down the path together. And a lot of people see that as the Father and the Son being symbolized as they walk this path. We are going to make this promise to Abraham, but we are the ones making it. And Abraham really he has a part to receive, but his fulfilling of the promise, it's not on him. He's still an old man with a barren wife. There's nothing that he can do to bring about the promised child that I'm making this promise to him about. but we will fulfill that promise. And the same goes with making a mighty nation out of them. And the same goes for this nation be a blessing to the whole earth. And the same goes for the land promise. We will surely do it. And this kind of harkens back to the verse that we saw last video, where we talked about replacement theology, and we said, isn't it bizarre that the first person to sort of bring up this idea of replacing the people of God with another new people of God was actually God himself, where he said, Moses, step aside, I'm going to wipe out these people and I'm going to start a new nation with you. And Moses, remember what he said, don't do it, Lord. Exodus 32:11, he says, remember Abraham, Isaac, Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by yourself. And this is what I think he's talking about here. You swore by yourself that you would bless them. You said, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven. That same verse that we were just looking at, Genesis 15. And this land of which I have spoken, I will give it to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. And so the Lord has made this promise by himself. And the strange thing comes in here. I like to call it the promise and the problem. Is that while it's unconditional, Abraham, you didn't even get to walk the path. You weren't even awake when I made these promises. I made them unconditionally. But we see in Genesis 17, and we'll see in another verse right after that, but there is sort of some conditions that are expected. There is something that's supposed to be coming from the people the promise is being made to. In Genesis 17, it says, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. I want you to listen to this. Walk before me and be blameless. Why? So that I may make my covenant between me and you and may multiply you greatly. He's just been promising him, I'm going to give you a nation, I'm going to give you a nation, I'm going to give you a nation. And now he says, you have to be blameless so that I can give you and multiply you greatly and make you into a nation. And so how do these things square? That this promise is made with almost without Abraham having to, he's not even awake for it. And you better be blameless or I will not fulfill the covenant. And so we even see, we go to the next chapter, Genesis 18. This is right before the Lord goes down to Sodom and Gomorrah to judge the city. And he wants this judging of Sodom and Gomorrah to be a picture to Abraham about how the Lord views sin. And so the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation. See, right there, he's talking about it's surely going to happen. I promised it. We can say he shall surely become a great and mighty nation. And all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Why does his children need to be righteous and do justice? So that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. So again, it's surely going to happen. It's promised that it's going to happen. And then here's the problem. He better be blameless. He better be righteous. He better do justice so that these things can surely take place. And so how do those two things square? Well, that's the crux of the problem that Israel faced, and how they went about being blameless and how they went about pursuing righteousness mattered, because Paul tells us they failed to reach that righteousness. Why? He said, because they pursued it as if it was works, as if it was you could do the law well enough, and they forgot that it was a promise. And so we're going to look in the next video and really delve into where Israel kind of got this wrong, and then about the hiding of the face of the Lord and how he plans to bring this all back in and fulfill these absolutely critical promises. Because remember, the very first thing that Satan said in the Garden of Eden, has the Lord really said? And so if the Lord has staked his integrity and his glory on a righteous people filling this land, what Satan's going to go after is that same way. Did the Lord really say that? Well, if he can get us to question these promises or make sure that those promises aren't fulfilled, then the Lord's not the Lord, and the whole thing crumbles. And so there is so much at stake here that this is really where, when we look at that final week that Daniel talked about, it's the fulfilling of these things. Can it really be done? Can the Lord take this nation and make them righteous and put them in that land so they can be a blessing to the entire world. Well, we're going to look more on that in the next video.